In the dense, suffocating jungles of Vietnam, where the chaos of war was a constant, a soldier's greatest fear was not just of the enemy, but of isolation. To be wounded, pinned down, and alone was a sentence of almost certain death. From the mud of the Mekong Delta to the highlands of the A Shau Valley, the call for a medic was a desperate prayer. And in Vietnam, that prayer was answered by the sound of thunder. The story of Dustoff is story not of conflict, but of compassion. Not of taking lives, but of saving them. It is the story of a medical revolution, born of necessity and forged in courage, that would forever change the calculus of survival on the battlefield.
My name is Pat. I was AC pilot with the 54th Medical Detachment in Chu Lai, Vietnam. It was late August 1967. The call came in hot. Wounded troops under fire, pinned down in the jungle, close to My San. We knew going in wasn't going to be easy. As we approached, the jungle canopy was thick, smoke rising through the trees. The radio was alive with chatter, friendlies calling for help, gunfire cracking in the background. I was in the left seat, flying with my co-pilot, and we could see tracers stitching the sky in front of us. The crew chief leaned out the open door, M16 ready, eyes scanning for the landing zone. Our medic was already preparing, bandages, IV bottles, morphine, ready to hit the ground running the moment we touched down. Every man in that helicopter knew his role, and we trusted each other with our lives. Coming in low, I pulled hard on the collective, weaving the Huey through bursts of enemy fire. The aircraft shuddered with the strain, but we held steady. My co-pilot called out altitudes and obstacles, his voice calm despite the chaos. We dropped into a small clearing, barely big enough for our skids. The moment we flared to land, rounds snapped past the cockpit. The crew chief laid down suppressive fire while the medic jumped out, racing to the wounded. Seconds felt like hours. I kept one hand on the controls, eyes darting between the gauges and the tree line, praying we'd all get out alive. Finally, the medic and crew chief hauled the wounded aboard. Blood, mud, and sweat filled the cabin, but the men were alive. As we lifted out, bullets tore through the jungle again, but somehow we climbed above it. The Huey groaned, the engine screaming, but she carried us clear. We made it back to the field hospital. The wounded were rushed out, and for us, just another mission ended. But I'll never forget that day. The courage of my crew, the trust between us, and the lives we managed to save, flying under fire in that battle-worn dust-off bird.
Jungle green, a sky of gray. Hear the rotors chop the day. Radio cracks a frantic plea. We've got wounded LZ hot, you copy me. No hesitation, no debate. Spinning blades decide our fate. To swap through the smoke and the fire's light. Dust off, turning darkness into flight. An angel's shadow on the ground, the most welcome blessed sound. Just hold on, we're coming through. When I have you wounded, our promise is true. Red Cross painted a fragile shield over bloody battlefield. Crew chief's eyes a focused glare. medic ready, says a silent prayer. Down the hoist into the fight, bringing hope into the night. Dust off through the smoke and the fire's light. Dust off, turning darkness into flight. An angel's shadow on the ground, the most welcome, blessed sound. Just hold on, we're coming through. When I have you wounded, our promise is true. For every soul we lift away to see their family another day, an echo of their courage calls beyond these jungle walls. Dust off, flying home, echoes in the wind,
Dust-off crews flew unarmed. Their mission, evacuate the wounded under fire. Their odds, steep. Their courage, unmatched. During the Vietnam War, dust-off missions rescued over 900,000 wounded. Some pilots flew more than 1,000 missions. Casualty rates among crews were among the highest in the war because they never hesitated. This is not just a story of helicopters and heroics. It's a story of humanity, of sacrifice, of the quiet valor that echoes long after the war is over. Charles L. Kelly, last words, "When I have your wounded." Our story begins in 1964, though its roots trace back to the lessons of Korea. The United States Army knew that the key to saving lives was speed. But in a country with few roads and dense jungle, ground evacuation was a deadly, time-consuming ordeal. The solution was the helicopter, specifically the Bell UH-1, the Huey. The 57th Medical Detachment was the first to pioneer this new form of air ambulance service. Their commander, Major Charles L. Kelly, was a man of uncompromising vision. He established the mission's core principle. The helicopter was a medical vehicle, an ambulance, and its mission was sacred. He gave the unit its iconic call sign, "Dust Off," and drilled into his crews a single-minded ethos. You go when called, no matter the weather, no matter the enemy. On July 1st, 1964, Major Kelly was on a mission, flying a dust-off Huey UH-1B helicopter near Vinh Long Province in the Mekong Delta. Enemy forces were in the area, and the LZ was considered to be dangerous. U.S. advisors in the ground radioed Kelly, urging him to turn back rather than risk his helicopter and crew. Kelly responded, "When I have your wounded." With that, he brought his helicopter into the hot landing zone despite the risk, staying with the creed of never leaving wounded behind. As his helicopter hovered over the pickup zone, Viet Cong small arm fire struck the aircraft. A single bullet hit Major Kelly in the chest, killing him instantly. His crew managed to fly the helicopter out, but Kelly became the first dust-off pilot killed in Vietnam. Kelly's last words would become the creed for every dust-off crew that followed. When I have your wounded. From that day forward, the legend of dust-off grew.
My name is Steven. I was a dust-off medic with the 54th Medical Detachment in Chu Lai, Vietnam. Our dust-off unit covered 3 provinces of the 5 in the 1st Corps. These provinces were known for the peasantry to be radical and revolutionary and fully inclined with the communists. Dust-off Huey helicopters were leading and taking more enemy hits than any other aircraft in Vietnam. But bad weather and night flying was killing more of us than the bullets the NVA and Viet Cong were throwing at us. Most other helicopter aviation units could stay back on base during bad weather and seldom flew at night. Not dust-off. We got the call 24/7 to evacuate the wounded from the field or anywhere else. Damn the weather or darkness of night. Our pilots, crew chiefs, and medics did not hesitate for a second. We ran to the chopper as rain drenched us or darkness kept us practically blind. That bird was in the air, flying just minutes after receiving the call. Most dust-off evacuation destinations were a half hour away or less from our base, sometimes a bit longer. There's not too much time to think about yourself on the way to the mission. Even knowing that we were heading towards an unsecured hot LZ, I did not place too much thought about my safety. I could only think about the condition of the wounded soldiers waiting for me. Would I be able to treat them and keep them alive long enough to deliver them to the hospital? I was well trained by the U.S. Army Medical Training Center at Fort Sam, Houston, and after arriving to Vietnam and serving as a medic in several dust-off missions, I accumulated sufficient experience to perform my job well. But it was not infrequent to pick up a patient from the field whose wounds were beyond what I could do to save his life. Late September, we received a radio call for a mission near Hip Duc, southwest of Hoi An. 2 Huey slicks had tried to get in but failed. When we arrived a distance from the LZ, Mr. Reed, our AC, spiraled down in tight circles. I could feel the G's pulling my ass hard onto my chicken plate, an armor plate that sits on the floor. We leveled off above the trees. Reed came low and fast towards the yellow smoke at the LZ. 2 Cobra helicopter gunships above put suppressive fire around the area with their miniguns and rockets. The area was full with 12 feet high elephant grass. No one on ground would stand up to help load or locate the patients. We were hovering around looking for the wounded when the VC opened fire on us. It came from the left side of the chopper, my side. We took some hits through the floor by the left hellhole seat. Reed was sitting on the left seat. The windshield shattered in front of him, filling his face with plexiglass. He did not have his visor down. Lieutenant Wakefield took over the controls and found a spot to land the aircraft. 4, maybe 5 troops quickly stood up and brought 2 wounded soldiers to the right side of the helicopter. Benny, the crew chief, quickly pulled them in. I could see they were both badly hurt. One had a head wound. The other soldier was drenched in blood with a sucking chest wound. It was hard to see how many injuries he had. Wakefield screamed through his intercom, "Are you guys ready? Let's get the hell out of here." Benny answered, "We are loaded. You're clear." Wakefield pulled the collective. We climbed straight up. We cleared the grass and the trees, cyclic stick forward, and flew to the hospital at top speed. I removed the blood-drenched bandage from the soldier with the head wound. He was missing a piece of his skull. As I was cleaning the dirt around the wound, Benny said, "I think this guy with the chest wound is dead. He stopped breathing." I quickly moved to the side of the other soldier and told Benny to place a clean bandage to cover the open head wound of the soldier I had been treating and start getting the IV bottle ready. I covered the chest wound with a plastic wrapper with one hand and opened the soldier's mouth with the other. I begun giving him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. He started to convulse and threw up into my mouth. That was the first one for me, very unpleasant. I cleared my mouth and his mouth from all the crap and tried mouth-to-mouth again. He threw up again into my mouth like a power hose. I quickly fell back and spit it out. I'm sorry to say, but I just couldn't make myself do it again. I just couldn't. I had another patient in critical condition to take care of. I moved away from this one, and of course he died.
The sound of an incoming Huey became the most beautiful sound in the world to an infantryman. Its silhouette against the sky was a symbol of hope. On the side of the helicopter, a simple red cross on a white background. It was supposed to be a symbol of neutrality, of mercy. But to the enemy, it often became a target.
I'm Santiago. I was a dust-off Huey helicopter crew chief with the 57th Medical Detachment in Long Binh, Vietnam. I was 19 years old when I arrived in Vietnam. In less than a month, I was assigned to be a crew chief. It was what I most wanted to be, not knowing what was waiting for me. I am now 72 years old, and there has not been a day in my life that the memories of flying dust-off missions as a crew chief in Vietnam don't arise in my mind. More than the bullets piercing through the thin skin of the chopper, more than our brave pilots spiraling down into nearly impossible landing zones. It was the wounded, the dead, the soldiers we evacuated from the battlefield. I could never get used to watching men with horrendous wounds, listening to their agony as I helped the medic treat them. I can still smell the spoiled vinegar smell of the mixture of dirt, blood, and guts from men who had been in the field for days. We tried to keep him alive until we delivered him to the hospital.
The dust-off crews flew unarmed, banking on the enemy to honor their mission. It was a gamble they often lost. The mission was a symphony of precise, courageous teamwork. A call would crackle over the radio, a set of coordinates, a number of wounded. Within minutes, the pilot and co-pilot were airborne. In the back sat the heart of the operation, the crew chief, who managed the aircraft and manned a door gun for suppression, and the medic, whose job was to perform life-saving care in the most hostile environment imaginable.
My name is Mike. I was a dust-off pilot with the 283rd Medical Detachment. I'd been in Vietnam about 7 months and had recently made AC aircraft commander. My crew and I had evacuated an injured soldier from Na Bay, a riverside base that supported operations in the Saigon area. We dropped him off at the 93rd Evacuation Hospital. It was getting dark as we were airborne, heading back to our home base at Tan Son Nhut. On the way, we heard the radio unit telephone operator, radio, reporting that another dust-off had been launched for an urgent mission up Highway 13. We told the radio we were nearby the pickup location. The weather was deteriorating badly. That route, it was dangerous now. I called the AC of the other dust-off, explained the situation. No doubt in my mind, he welcomed the suggestion we take the mission. He breathed a sigh of relief as he accepted our offer. He gave us the essential info for the pickup. It was up the road to the Minh Than Special Forces camp. We had about 50 miles to go. We continued up Highway 13 as the rain intensified and turbulence became a lot worse. Lightning flashes we'd seen to the east began moving slowly into our flight path.
Flying the aircraft, ignoring instruments, usually ends in loss of control and disaster. The thunderstorm appeared to be moving east to west, and shortly the worst weather would be directly in our flight path. It was not going to be easy. I planned to make our approach from a definite position and selected Chon Ton on Highway 13, about 13 kilometers southeast of the pickup site. There would be nothing but woods below, and we would be uncertain of our position. Luck would play a large part in our success or failure to reach the wounded soldier. We didn't have a backup course of action if the site wasn't located on the first attempt. But David, my co-pilot, and I agreed on the plan and pressed on. David flew on instruments, while I and our 2 crewmen looked for visual clues to our position and progress. I glanced at the back, at Ted, the crew chief, and Gordon, the medic. They were looking intently out the sides of the helicopter, reporting occasional lights that came into view. The rain became extremely heavy and made it impossible to see anything ahead as the violent turbulence tossed us about. "It's the lightning that scares me," said David. "What if it hits us?" "It is unlikely," I told him. I decided it was time to contact the ground unit and learn more about the situation. I wanted to know the condition of the wounded soldiers and the weather at the pickup site. "Damage Charlie 3, this is Dust Off 33. We're inbound to your location." "Dust Off 33, this is Damage Charlie 3. We have 4 wounded troops down here. All have multiple shrapnel wounds caused by a short-round mortar. There's a huge thunderstorm over our position. It's raining cats and dogs. We've got to have adequate visibility to locate you and make a pickup." "Dust Off 33, it's hard to measure visibility here. We are totally without light." "Roger, Damage Charlie 3, we're pressing on. We'll try our best, but can't promise we'll be able to punch through these thunderstorms. Imagine hoping for a flash of lightning at just the right moment, so we might be able to see our way to a safe landing." Suddenly, a violent gust of wind hit us, forced the aircraft into a steep bank to the left. Then, a brilliant flash of lightning detonated right outside David's door. It nearly blinded us. The rain slammed into us with such ferocity, it made a deafening noise when it hit the windshield. I told David, "When we're able to make visual contact with the ground unit, stay on the gauges. I'll give you directions to keep you over the area, and take over only when a landing's possible. I'm going to contact them now. Damage Charlie 3, this is Dust Off 33. We're about 3 miles from your location. Do you hear our aircraft? We're coming in from the south-southeast." "Negative on hearing your chopper. All we're hearing is the heavy rain coming down on the trees and the thunder. For your information, the trees on either side of the road are approximately 100 feet high, but there appears to be sufficient clearance for you to find land between them. Dust Off 33, I think I hear a chopper coming toward me now. Sounds like you're coming right at me. I only have 1 flashlight to signal you with." "Roger, Damage Charlie. I turned on my nav lights. Do you see me?" "I can't see you, but I can hear you coming directly towards me." "This is Dust Off. I turned on my searching light. Do you see my signal?" "I am looking for it, Dust Off." David was flying the gauges. We were still encountering severe turbulence. Occasionally we'd ride through strong updrafts, then equally powerful downdrafts. We were at the worst part of the storm. I looked back for an instant and saw that Gordon and Ted holding on. I gave them a thumbs up to alleviate their fears. I finally spotted a dim flash of light through the rain. We found the pickup site. I had David set up a right-hand orbiting and begin a slow descent while I kept the tabs on the lone flashlight. I turned off the all-exterior lights. I didn't want the Viet Cong to be aware of our presence other than what they could hear from the sound of the chopper circling somewhere above them. I told the medic and the crew chief setting on both sides of the aircraft to guide me and clear the main and tail rotor when I made the approach. In the midst of a violent thunderstorm and blackness of night, with lightning flashing every second and the chopper being bounced around by extreme turbulence, it would take our best combined efforts to pull off this mission. They knew their job and responsibilities. I was confident that I could depend on them. "Damage Charlie, this is Dust Off. Give me a few quick flashes for confirmation. Point your light at the sound of the chopper." "I've turned my lights off. No need for the VC to know everything that is going on." Roger, dust off. I'm flashing my light in your direction. I can't see a thing. I see you, flashes. Damage, Charlie. Keep that flashlight pointed at the sound of the helicopter. The lower we get, the more important it is for us to maintain visual contact. David had us down to 1,000 feet indicated. It was time for me to take over and make the landing visually. Ted and Gordon were at their station, lending assistance in clearing both sides plus the tail rotor during the landing process. I called the ground unit. Damage, Charlie. This is dust off. We got a good look at your position. Most of us up here are having doubts about the width of the area between the trees. We're not sure there's enough space for the main rotor to clear all obstacles. Dust off. I know it looks tight, and it is, but I am sure you'll have enough room to make it. Roger. I'm going to turn on my landing light. You guys in the rear, let me know what you see. The landing light seemed to be magnify each drop of rain. The crew chief and the medic reported they couldn't see anything but rain. I turned off the landing light. Another flash of lighting, but I could not make out any details. I was concentrating on the ground's unit flashlight and keeping it in sight. I descended another 100 feet and turned the landing light on again. David yelled over the interphone, "Trees, trees." I stopped the descent. "I see them, David. We're okay. They are below us." I turned the landing light off. I am going to line up with the road for an approach. I'll be rolling out of the shallow turn in a second or so. Gordon, Ted, keep an eye on my clearances when we get down to treetop level. I called the ground. Damage, Charlie. This is dust off. I'm about to line up with the road. I'll be coming from the northeast and hope to make the landing, so advice on any Viet Cong activity you see or hear. Roger, dust off. As I maneuvered into position, I turned the landing light on again and saw the treetops. As lightning flashed again, I could make out the general area of the evacuation site and pick up the narrow road. When I arrived at the proper sight angle, I began the descent. "Okay, you guys in the rear, be alert. Call out if we are getting too close to the trees." A brilliant display of lighting that seemed to last a good 5 seconds enabled me to make out the area with a high degree of clarity despite the heavy rain. I was exactly where I wanted to be. I continued my slow descent between the trees. There was little room to spare on either side. "You are looking good on the left," said Gordon. "You are clear on the right," added Ted. There was another strong flash of lighting. Just before I set the chopper down, I heard the main rotor make contact with some tree branches. "Damage, Charlie. What did I hit before landing?" "Dust off. You cut about a foot off some branches. I don't see that they caused any damage." Skids on the ground. Soldiers rushed towards the right side of the helicopter, bringing the wounded on stretchers as torrential rain fell on them. David told Gordon and Ted to hurry with the wounded. "Get them on board and let's get the hell out of here." They loaded the 4 wounded soldiers. "We're loaded, all ready for takeoff." "Ready, David?" "I am pulling pitch." I pulled up on the collective and increased power for a positive rate of climb. The rain continued to pound down heavily. After the climb out, I made a slow turn to the left, intercepted the 358 radial, and flew down Highway 13 to Lai Khe. It was still raining, but with much less intensity. We delivered the wounded to the 1st Medical Battalion. On our way back to Tan Son Nhut, we all sat quietly flying back to home base. I broke silence and said on the intercom for all the crew to hear, "How was it possible that we were able to carry out and survive that mission?" Everybody was too numb to respond. It was the same question I asked myself in other dust-off missions.
They flew into landing zones so hot they were called hornets' nests, where the air was thick with bullets. The crew chief would lay down fire, trying to keep the enemy's heads down, while the medic, often with the help of the grunts on the ground, would load the wounded. They were on the ground for seconds, a terrifying eternity, before lifting off, carrying their precious cargo. In the air, the medic went to work, stopping bleeding, administering morphine, keeping men alive for the short, frantic flight to a surgical hospital. This was the birth of the golden hour, the critical window where immediate medical care can mean the difference between life and death. Dustoff didn't just embrace this concept, they perfected it.
Dust kicks up as the rotor hums, a symphony of blades and drums. Steel birds cut through the burning skies, while shadows dance where courage lies. Under fire we rise, we fall through the chaos. We hear the call with trembling hands and steady aim. We hold the line in the fiercest flame. Sink deep in the crimson sand, the weight of hope in every hand. Whispers carry what words can't say, a silent prayer in the fray. The night won't break, but neither will we. A spark survives where none can see. Under storm won't know the names we bear. It won't see the scars we wear. But every life pulled from the tide is a victory they can't deny.
In the long and honored history of Dustoff, the call to serve was answered with a courage that often defied belief. For some, that courage would be recognized with the nation's highest award for valor, the Medal of Honor. On January 6, 1968, near Chu Lai, an impenetrable fog grounded all aircraft. A wall of white, but beneath it American soldiers lay wounded and dying. Major Patrick Henry Brady, a pilot with the 54th Medical Detachment, volunteered to fly when no one else could. Using only his instruments and an intimate knowledge of the treacherous terrain, he descended through the fog and into a storm of enemy fire. Again and again. Through minefields and mountains, Brady and his crew saved more than 51 wounded men that day, proving that for Dustoff, even the impossible was a call to action. That same spirit of defiance was echoed by Chief Warrant Officer Michael Joseph Novosel. On October 2, 1969, he flew his Huey into a blistering kill zone to extract a group of surrounded soldiers. Under constant fire, With his aircraft repeatedly hit and himself wounded, Novosel refused to leave. 15 times he returned, his determination absolute. By the end of the ordeal, he had saved 29 men. A veteran of 2 previous wars, Novosel's actions that day were the culmination of a lifetime of service, condensed into a single, heroic afternoon. But the ultimate test of courage could come not just in the air, but from the wreckage on the ground. On May 24, 1970, Sergeant First Class Louis Richard Rocco, a medic, was aboard a dust-off helicopter when it was shot down. Rocco was injured with a fractured wrist, hip, and a severely bruised back. Ignoring his injuries, under enemy fire, he pulled the unconscious wounded pilots and crew chief from the burning helicopter. Rocco administered first aid to his crew until his wounds and burns caused him to collapse and lose consciousness. 3 men, 3 moments in time, all reflecting the same extraordinary spirit that defined Dust Off and the enduring echoes of courage.
I was a medic with the 237th Medical Detachment, stationed at Camp Evans, north of Way. Every morning, the same routine. Check the bird, check the gear, wait for the call. And the call always came. This one, it came from Hai Lang. Heavy contact. Grunts were pinned down. This mission still lives inside me. Hai Lang, out by the rice fields. The call came in late in the afternoon, multiple wounded, some already dead. The enemy was all around them. We knew it would be hot. As the chopper climbed out, the landscape unrolled beneath us. The green patchwork of rice paddies, the winding rivers, the distant mountains shrouded in mist. The radio crackled. LZ is hot, dust off. Small arms fire, possibly RPGs. We got 5 wounded, 2 killed in action. 5 wounded, 2 KIA. Just numbers on a frequency. But in your gut, you already knew the young faces. The KIA, killed in action. It meant you failed to get there fast enough, or they were beyond saving. But the wounded, they were ours. We spiraled down to treetop level, skirting the tree line. The rice paddies spread out like a vast, flat mirror. Except this mirror was pockmarked with muzzle flashes, disturbed by the thud of incoming rounds. You could see the water being kicked up by the bullets. We were flying low, coming in under fire. The ground troops were doing their best to lay down cover. My stomach always tightened up, every single time. Not fear exactly, more like extreme focus. The adrenaline just takes over your body. As we approached, I could see smoke rising and figures waving desperately. The Huey's blades kicked water across the field as we flared into a small patch of dry ground. I had my aid bag strapped to me, IV ready, and morphine syringes tucked in the pocket of my chicken plate armor. The moment the skids touched the ground, the crew chief and I quickly stepped out the door, placed our feet on the ground, and stood next to the helicopter. No one came to bring the wounded. The scene in that paddy, it was organized chaos. Grunts were shouting, laying low, returning fire. The AC told me and the crew chief to quickly go get the wounded. We both ran. The smell of wet rice, the acrid smell of gunpowder mixed with the vinegar scent of blood and dirt hit me all at once. The first man I got to was lying face down. I flipped him over, a young soldier, maybe 19. I saw the entry wound, chest, high up. Not good. I ripped open his fatigues, exposing a sucking chest wound. My hands moved on instinct. I tore open a petrolatum gauze packet, slapped it over the wound, and taped it down hard on 3 sides, leaving one side open. That creates a flutter valve, lets air out, keeps air from rushing in and collapsing his lung. His breathing was shallow, his eyes wide with a mix of pain and terror. I pulled out a morphine syringe, jabbed it into his thigh, and pinned the empty tube to his collar. "You're gonna be okay," I remember whispering, though I didn't know if he could hear me over the rotor wash and all the chaos. "You're going home." Next was a grunt with a shattered leg, bone protruding, a terrible sight. I quickly applied a tourniquet high on his thigh to staunch the arterial bleeding, then started cutting away his trousers to assess the damage for a quick field dressing. No time for a proper splint in the LZ. Just stop the bleed and get him on the bird. He was conscious, screaming. Another morphine syringe, another syringe on the collar. The enemy fire was getting closer, rounds snapping into the mud. But we kept moving, one man at a time toward the chopper. The crew chief and other soldiers were bringing the 2 KIA. They were casualties of war, beyond our help. Our priority was the living. The wounded were carried and placed onto cabin floor, and then the 2 bodies, silent, faces pale in the fading light. We laid them gently at the back of the cabin. We got everyone loaded, the chest wound, the leg wound, and then 3 more. One with multiple shrapnel injuries, another with a belly wound, and a 5th with a head wound. The last one was barely conscious. We cleared the pilots. We're loaded. The pilots pulled the collective, then pushed the cyclic forward. The rice paddy water churning into a violent spray as we climbed away. Once we lifted off, my world shrank to the cabin. The whining sound of the engine and chopping whomp of the main rotor blades drowned everything. But I could still hear the groans, the gasps. I knelt beside the man with the chest wound. His breathing was shallow, erratic. I kept talking to him, sometimes just words, sometimes just my voice, trying to anchor him to this side of life. The flight to the field hospital felt like an eternity. The chest wound, he was fading. I kept checking his dressing, making sure the flutter valve was still working. The crew chief helped me with the IV, a bag of Ringer's lactate, to try and keep his blood pressure up. But his breathing became more labored, shallower. His lips were turning blue. We were doing chest compressions, but it was a losing battle. The rhythmic thump, thump, thump of the main rotor blades, usually a sound of hope, now felt like a death knell. His eyes wide open, looking straight at the ceiling. Then there was the soldier with the belly wound. He was bleeding internally. I'd started an IV, sure, but it was like pouring water into a sieve. I kept him on his side to prevent aspiration, checking his pulse, his respirations. He was moaning, softly at first, then nothing. His breath hitched, a final ragged gasp. Again we tried, again we failed. 2 more dead. 2 boys who made it onto our bird, but didn't make it to the surgeons. When we finally landed, dust and rotor wash kicking up around the emergency room tent, it was a blur. Hands reached in, pulling out the living and the dead. You just passed them off, gave a quick rundown to the awaiting doctors, and then you were back in the bird, ready for the next call. After all these years, those faces keep coming back to me. The sounds, the smells, the dying soldier in your hands. We were just medics, just trying to bring them home. Sometimes we did. Sometimes we just brought them a little closer. That's the part that stays with you, the ones you couldn't save. The echoes of courage, yeah. Some of those echoes are pretty damn quiet.
As the war escalated from 1965 to 1968, so too did the demand for dust-off. At the height of the conflict, over 100 dust-off helicopters were in operation. During the Tet Offensive, crews flew around the clock, pushing themselves and their machines to the absolute limit. By the time the last American combat troops left Vietnam in 1973, the numbers were staggering. Dust-off crews had evacuated nearly 900,000 casualties, half of them American. They flew over 1 million missions, and because of them, if a soldier was wounded in Vietnam and made it to a hospital, he had a staggering 97% chance of survival, a rate unheard of in any previous war. About 1/3 of all dust-off crew members became casualties, and the loss of dust-off helicopter was 3.3 times that of all other types of helicopter missions. The dust-off crew members, who made up a small percentage of the helicopter crewmen who served in Vietnam, suffered a disproportionately high percentage of the deaths. The legacy of dust-off is not written in the history of battles won or lost. It is measured in the lives of the fathers, sons, and brothers who came home.
My name is Steve. I was a dust-off pilot with the 159th Medical Detachment in Long Binh, Vietnam. I had been in country for about 5 months. It was now early April 1972, just a week before the People's Army of Vietnam launched their Eastern Offensive. Over 200,000 NVA soldiers and hundreds of T-34 and T-54 tanks crossed the border from North Vietnam and Cambodia. The South Vietnamese Army was suffering enormous losses. Every dust-off unit in Vietnam was overwhelmed with day and night missions, mostly South Vietnamese wounded, but also American wounded and dead from the remaining American ground combat units and military advisors. By this time, the Army had painted most dust-off helicopters white with red crosses. The thought was, since dust-off helicopters did not carry the mounted M60 machine guns that every other Army Huey helicopters had mounted on each side, by replacing the dust-off helicopter's paint job from green to white, it could possibly reduce the number of NVA and Viet Cong soldiers from shooting an unarmed white helicopter ambulance evacuating the wounded. I don't know how many enemy soldiers respected the white Red Cross helicopter ambulance symbolism, but I can tell you, they sure looked like easier targets for the enemy. Every white dust-off helicopter was riddled with bullet hole patches. Many shot to hell barely made it back to base. Several shot down, not only by bullets, but by the weapon we feared the most, the newly introduced Soviet SA-7 SAM heat-seeking missile, which was taking a heavy toll on Huey, Cobra, and Chinook helicopters. That deadly missile would detect the heat from your helicopter's gas exhaust. A tail of hot heat. Once it sensed the heat from that tail trailing far behind the chopper, there was no way to run away from the SA-7. At Mach 1.5 speed, it would quickly catch up to you and blow you out of the sky. Both the American and South Vietnamese Army were losing so many helicopters to the SA-7 that they had to redesign and introduce a new gas exhaust device that would redirect the helicopter exhaust gases towards the main rotor blades to dissipate the hot gases, preventing a gas heat tail from forming. Every Huey and Cobra helicopter in Vietnam had its exhaust system replaced. The SA-7 missile would emit a white smoke trail as it traveled through the sky. Both the medic and the crew chief were instructed to quickly yell, "SAM!" to alert the pilots to take immediate action before the missile detected the heat from our tail. On April 7th, we received a call that on Highway 13 near Anlock in the 3rd Corps Tactical Zone, an ARVN convoy was making its way up the highway when it came under enemy ambush. There was an intense firefight. NVA rocket and mortar barrages. All the convoy's vehicles were either destroyed or captured. 3 American advisors and 1 ARVN officer were wounded and trapped by the attack. A dust-off helicopter from another unit answered their call, but ran into intense ground fire. Taking a lot of hits, it had abort the mission and withdraw from the area. One of our 159th dust-off from Long Bin took the mission, escorted by 2 Cobra gunships. Once more, heavy fire from the ground prevented a successful rescue. The dust-off aircraft was hit with numerous rounds, and the medic took a bullet through his leg. The approach had to be abandoned. The damaged chopper managed to land at a near base. At Long Bin, my friend Robert, ACW-2 aircraft commander, communicated with the dust-off pilots from the aborted, damaged dust-off and determined that a successful rescue of the 3 wounded advisors and ARVN officer could still be accomplished. Robert convinced our detachment commander to grant him the mission. I volunteered to be his co-pilot. Without hesitation, Nicholas, the medic, and Tom, the crew chief, also volunteered for the mission. 2 Cobra gunships, a C-130 Spectre gunship, and a VNAF Skyriders swept the area shortly before we arrived. After making a high-altitude reconnaissance, Robert took the controls and began our approach, as the gunships concentrated on suspected enemy positions. We maintained constant radio communication with the wounded advisors. They used a green pen flare to identify their position. During the approach, the Cobra gunships flanked the dust-off and unleashed their miniguns and rockets over the tree lines on either side of the highway. As we leveled out just above the highway and hovered towards the advisor's presumed location, Tom, crew chief, sitting on the cabin floor of the right side of the aircraft, opened his eyes wide as he saw an NVA soldier shooting directly at him from the tree line. However, all his bullets fell short of the helicopter. We continued hovering down the highway. The wounded advisors were nowhere in sight. It was beginning to get dark. Suddenly, both Nicholas and Tom called out that extremely heavy fire was directed toward both sides of the chopper. So much for the unarmed white dust-off helicopters with its bright painted red crosses. Robert made a 180 turn. We came under even heavier small arms fire and rocket attack. We had used all our resources in attempting to rescue these people. However, we continued to try to locate the advisors. We were the 3rd bird that tried to get this wounded soldiers out. We did not want to leave without them. The NVA intensified its gunfire on our dust-off. I could hear the bullets hitting our aircraft. I looked to my left. Robert was sitting on the pilot's left seat of the helicopter. He was leaning against his seat armor with blood over his chicken plate chest armor. I immediately took over the control of the aircraft. Robert's feet were interfering with the tail rotor pedals. Tom and Nicholas quickly removed Robert from the AC's seat and placed him in the cabin floor. Nicholas continued to make every effort to revive him, but Robert had died instantly from a bullet wound to the chest. We could not continue with the mission. I flew and landed nearby Lai Key. The advisors were later rescued by an UH-1H Loach helicopter from the 1st Cavalry. The tragic irony is that Robert had only 2 weeks left in Vietnam, and it was the last day he was scheduled to fly.
Jay. I was a dust-off crew chief with the 57th Medical Detachment. I arrived to Vietnam in the middle of the Eastern Offensive in July 1972. Dust-off crews were worn out from relentless day and night missions. Both the 57th and the 159th dust-off were based in Long Binh. On any mission, you could have an AC and a crew chief from the 57th and the co-pilot and medics from the 159th, or any other random combination. When I, for the first, walked onto the flight line on a rainy afternoon, it was exciting but also eerie to see all the dust-off helicopter parked between the revetments, all bangled up with several scattered bullet hole sheet metal patches throughout the bird. Recently, a young 21-year-old pilot from the 159th had been killed on a dust-off mission. Also, a crew chief due to getting shot on both legs. His chopper had been taking enemy hits in too many missions. The number of wounded ARVN soldiers and those jumping on his helicopter to get away from the battlefield was staggering. This crew chief finally lost it. It really messed with his mind. They sent him home. Anyway, his one-year tour in Vietnam was shortly coming to an end. There was a shortage of crew chiefs. A number were finishing their tour in Vietnam, and others had survived many close calls, and as their tour was getting short, they quit flying. No one was forced or ordered to fly with dust off. All pilots, medics, and crew chiefs volunteered to fly or were asked. If you declined or quit flying for any reason, no problem. It was well understood. The risk in flying with dust off was too high. However, once you were on board, when the mission came, no one chickened out. The two pilots, the crew chief, and the medic were a tight team. We each had our vital part and responsibility for the success of the mission. 2 weeks after I arrived to the 57th, I was selected to be a crew chief. It was not something I expected to be asked so soon. I was 19 years old and very green. Without asking a single question, I immediately accepted the job. There was nothing I wanted more than to be a helicopter crew chief in Vietnam. To be a dust-off helicopter crew chief was music to my ears. Little that I knew how much the job was going to ask of me. Flying into insecure landings, getting shot at, helping the medic treating soldiers with terrible wounds, some dying in front of me. The pain was very uncomfortable to watch. The medics applied morphine shots to alleviate the badly wounded soldiers' excruciating pain. However, due to the problem with soldiers abusing heroin, which was spreading among the troops in the army in Vietnam, dust-off was no exception. The morphine in the medics' first aid bags was being stolen so regularly that the medical command in Vietnam discontinued supplying dust-off with morphine. Think about it. No morphine available to kill the pain of wounded soldiers. The medic had to use some powder or other means to alleviate the pain. Soldiers had to wait for dust-off to fly them to the hospital to get the morphine for their pain. In Long Binh, at all times, 24/7, we had 2 dust-off helicopters, each with their crew of 4 ready for the mission, first up and second up. For the crews on duty, next to the orderly room there was a waiting room with bunk beds. We slept with our clothes on and had zippers on our boots to quickly put them on when the call came in the middle of the night. Every minute counted. It could make the difference between a patient live or die in the field or on the way to the hospital. We had 1 and sometimes 2 dust-off birds on duty in Can Tho in the Mekong Delta. We would rotate the crews from Long Binh to stay in Can Tho for 1 or 2 weeks. The 18th Command Aviation Company in Can Tho provided the 57th a 2-room apartment on a 2-story barracks where we slept and kept our radios, waiting to be called for the mission. One of the weeks I was on duty in Kentho, we got hit with a rocket attack in the middle of the night. It was loud. We quickly got up from bed and ran downstairs to the bunker outside. One day we received a call late at night. There had been an auto accident on a highway west of Saigon. It was about a 15-minute flight from Long Binh. Vietnamese civilians had been badly injured. It was very dark and we were flying low following the highway. Suddenly, the medic sitting on the left yelled, "High tension wires, ahead!" The AC immediately pulled the collective and the skids barely missed grabbing onto the wires. The wires were invisible to me and to the pilots until Gordon noticed a high-tension tower to his left. As we climbed, I noticed the other tower trailing to my right with long wires crossing our path below. We arrived to the car wreck and landed to the side of the road. There was already an ambulance there. All the cars with their headlights on us blinded us. As the main rotor spinning loudly, 2 Vietnamese men brought a young injured woman on a stretcher. However, they didn't want us to keep their stretcher. So as I grabbed and tried to pull the woman from the stretcher into the helicopter, she screamed. Her hair got caught on the hardware of the stretcher. I had no other choice than to pull that part of her hair with my hand and tear away it off the stretcher. She screamed even louder. We flew her and 2 other injured walking patients to Saigon Hospital. When it came to the mission, every pilot, crew chief, and medic on duty was sober, fit, and ready, keen aware to perform the job that lives depended on. However, when we were off duty, some of the crew got together to smoke pot as they listened rock and roll, while others preferred drinking alcohol while playing cards and listening to country music. Unfortunately, sometimes there was tension between the 2 groups, what we called the heads and the juicers. There was also the black and white racial issue among some of the men, but only on the ground, never ever on the mission. Some of the crew on their off time would just like to stay in their room and read, or just to be left alone to do whatever of their choosing. It was late November 1972. U.S. troops were being withdrawn very rapidly from Vietnam. We were wrapping our gear to turn over Long Binh to the Vietnamese army. All crew members from the 159th had been already officially transferred to the 57th Medical Detachment. We were facing a big problem. We loved our pet dogs. We had a number of dogs. We had become very close to these animals. They loved us as much as we loved them. The 57th was being transferred to Tan Son Nhut in Saigon. However, MACV would not allow us to take our dogs with us. Not allow us to take our beloved dogs? It was known that canine was a preferred dish for some Vietnamese. What the fuck are we to do with our dogs? Just leave them behind to get cooked and eaten? We had to make a choice. We had to kill our dogs. However, we had a week or more before we had to destroy our pets, so we decided to wait for the last moment. A day or 2 days later, I was in my hutch talking with some of my friends when we heard a gunshot and a terrible-sounding scream outside. The screams were relentless. We quickly ran outside, and to our abhorrent consternation, it was Herb, our dog, laying on the ground, moving and jerking his legs. His loud screams sounded almost human. My heart dropped to my stomach. We were all next to our dog with wide-open eyes, frozen, watching him suffer. My friend Osborne turned around and ran into his sleeping quarters and came out with a .38 Colt revolver. As the screams continued, Osborne shot him once. Herb made an abhorrent sound with a vicious-looking face as he faced directly at Osborne. He shot him 2 more times. All came quiet. Herb was finally dead. That scene left us all cold and shocked, most of all Osborne. We soon found out who shot Herb. It was Jones, a trigger-happy pilot. He was a damn good pilot, built big, not easy to scare. He was not very well liked by crew chiefs and medics. He had and showed the attitude that officers, the pilots, were far superior than the enlisted, the crew chiefs and medics. That attitude did not work well in Dust-Off, where every crew member on the mission was equally as important as the others. Dust-Off crews were a tight group. Respect of each other was the norm. Jones took the liberty to go hunting our dogs. It did not go very well for him, and less for Herb. It was the first and last dog he shot. He didn't even finish the job killing our dog. Osborne had to do it. Osborne was a red-hair, 6'3", private first class. He worked in the supply room for the 57th. In rage, Osborne stormed to the orderly room. We followed after him. Osborne walked in and grabbed this warrant officer by the shirt with both hands. The officer's face turned pale white. Almost touching noses, Osborne cursed Jones to no end. The XO and 2 pilots grabbed and pulled Osborne. With soft voice and kind way, they calmed down Osborne. After this unpleasant and painful event, no one had the stomach to kill the dogs. We pulled out from Long Bin, leaving our dogs behind. Maybe our CO found a more humane way to kill the dogs. I never asked.
The phased withdrawal of American forces from Vietnam, begun in the summer of 1968, continued until on the 11th of August 1972, the last American ground combat unit stood down at Da Nang. The American venture in this small, remote Asian country had come full circle. More than 7 years earlier, on March 8, 1965, the first U.S. ground combat forces had landed on these same beaches. In December 1961, the first U.S. military units, 2 helicopter companies, had arrived in Saigon to aid the South Vietnamese government. It had been the longest war in the United States history, and almost half of it had been developed to the withdrawal. The drawdown of medical support paralleled that of combat forces, but lasted a little longer because of continuing medic needs non-combat U.S. forces in Vietnam. In the early months of 1972, MedCom air ambulances decreased from 48 to 30, leaving 5 detachments: the 57th, 159th, 237th, 247th, and the 571. In June 1972, the air ambulance platoon of the 1st Cavalry stood down, leaving all air ambulances missions to the few remaining non-divisional dust-off units. In February 1973, 3 of the last 4 dust-off detachments, the 237th, 247th, and the 571, stood down. In February, the 57th Detachment, the first to arrive in Vietnam and whose early commander, Major Charles Kelly, had created the dust-off mystique, prepared to become the last to leave, closing down its operations at Tan Son Nhut. On the 11th of March, it flew the last dust-off mission in Vietnam for an appendicitis case. After they turned in their aircraft on 14th March, the few remaining members of the 57th had little to occupy their time. Every now and then they had to check on their departure date. No one demanded any work on them. On 28th of March, they received orders to move to Camp Alpha, the personnel staging facility at Tan Son Nhut, where they were restricted to the compound pending their flight out. Finally, at 100 on the 20th night, they boarded the bus for a ride to catch their flight home. The driver halted the bus some 50 feet from the flood-lighted jet and kept the doors closed, while a double file of people formed between the bus and the boarding stairs. 2 lines were composed of American, South Vietnamese, North Vietnamese, and Viet Cong, all members of the 4-power Joint Military Commission that was supervising the implementation of the peace treaty. The bus door opened, and one at a time, the departing personnel of the 57th marched through the double file. They had been part of the last U.S. Army operational personnel in South Vietnam. The same day, the Military Assistance Command Vietnam, known as MAC-V, lowered its flag and ceased to function for the first time since 1962. The ground war in Vietnam was completely in the hands of the Republic of Vietnam. During a long, cruel, and ultimately losing struggle, dust-off personnel had comported themselves with courage and honor, providing that a band of brave and dedicated pilots, medics, and crew chiefs could make this new mode of medical evacuation work extremely well, even against well-prepared enemy ground fire. 51 years later, with the persuasion of Medal of Honor recipient Patrick Brady, the dust-off crews of the Vietnam War Congressional Gold Medal Act, S-2825, was passed by Congress and signed into law by President Joe Biden on September 26, 2024. An act to award a Congressional Gold Medal to the United States Army dust-off crews of the Vietnam War, collectively, in recognition of their extraordinary heroism and life-saving actions in Vietnam.